He was the Duke of Rothaven, a man whose power was rivaled only by the ice in his veins. She was the woman forced to become his wife, a political pawn in a game she never asked to join. On their wedding night, Alistair Blackwood looked at his new bride and delivered a sentence that would become her prison. "You are only my Duchess in name." For a year she lived as a ghost in his halls until the day she vanished. And only in the terrifying silence of her absence did the Duke realize that his in-name-only Duchess had taken his entire world with her. The heavy oak doors of Rothaven Hall closed behind Lady Alara Vance, sealing her fate with a sound of mournful finality. The sound echoed the slam of the carriage door, the rustle of the priest's robes, and the hollow ring of her own voice as she'd spoken her vows just hours before. She was, as of 3 o'clock that afternoon, Alara Blackwood, Duchess of Rothaven. And she had never felt more like a fraud. Her husband, Alistair Blackwood, the Duke of Rothaven, had not touched her. He had not so much as offered his arm to escort her from the carriage. He strode ahead, his broad shoulders encased in a perfectly tailored black coat, his boot heels striking the marble floor like a judge's gavel. He was a man of cold, indisputable authority, a man whispered about in Parliament, a confidant of the Prince Regent himself, and, as of this moment, her jailer. Their marriage was a political necessity, a crude but effective tool to merge her family's failing estates with his burgeoning empire. Her father, the Earl of Amesbury, had bartered her like livestock to avoid ruin. Alistair Blackwood, in need of the Amesbury lands to secure his northern industrial interests, had agreed to the price. The household staff was assembled in the grand hall. They stood in rigid lines, their faces carefully blank. Alara looked at them, sensing their curiosity, their pity. She was the unwanted mistress of this grand, cold mausoleum. "Mrs. Greystone," Alistair's voice cut through the silence. It was a deep, resonant baritone, devoid of any warmth. A woman built like a fortress, clad in black bombazine, stepped forward. "Your Grace. The Duchess will require settling in. See to her rooms, inform her of the household schedule." He spoke of her as if she were another piece of furniture delivered from London. "Of course, Your Grace." Mrs. Greystone turned to Alara, her expression unreadable. "Your Grace." Alara forced a small nod, her throat too tight to speak. Alistair turned, his gaze finally landing on her. He was strikingly handsome, with dark hair swept back from a high forehead and eyes the colour of a winter storm. But there was no welcome in them. There was nothing at all. He studied her for a moment, his lip curling just slightly, as if assessing a purchase he was already regretting. "We shall dine at 8, he stated, separately. "I have work that requires my immediate attention. I trust you will not find it too taxing to entertain yourself." He didn't wait for a reply. He turned and ascended the grand staircase, disappearing into the shadows of the upper gallery. The staff, taking their cue from their master, began to disperse, melting back into the duties of the house. Alara was left standing alone in the cavernous hall, her velvet travelling cloak still heavy on her shoulders. Mrs. Greystone reappeared at her side. "This way, Your Grace. Your chambers are in the east wing." The east wing, as far from the master's west wing as one could get. The message was clear. Her rooms were magnificent, larger than the entire ground floor of her father's crumbling manor. A fire roared in the hearth, but it did nothing to warm the chill that had settled deep in her bones. A young, nervous maid named Alice was assigned to her. Will His Grace be joining you?" Alice asked, her eyes wide as she unpacked Alara's modest wardrobe, placing it in the cavernous, empty armoire. "No, Alice. His Grace is occupied," The hours passed. 7 o'clock came. 8. A solitary meal was served in her private sitting room, a silver tray of exquisite food she could not bring herself to eat. At 10:30, there was a sharp, commanding knock. Ilara, who had been sitting by the window watching a storm roll in over the moors, started. Alice opened the door to reveal the Duke. He stood in the doorway, framed like a dark portrait. He had changed from his travelling clothes into a dressing gown of deep burgundy silk, but he looked no less imposing. "Leave us," he commanded Alice, who scurried out of the room. He did not enter. He simply stood at the threshold, his presence filling the room, suffocating her. "Madam," he began, the word a blade, "we must come to an understanding. I did not seek this marriage. You, I assume, did not either. It is a contract, and I will honor the terms of that contract. Your debts are paid. Your family is secure. You will have the run of this house, a generous allowance, and the protection of my name." He took a step inside, his eyes raking over her, making her feel small, insignificant. "In return," he continued, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous level, "I expect 2 things. First, you will be the very image of propriety. My name will not be sullied by gossip or indiscretion. You will be a credit to the Rothaven title, even if you are a stranger to the man who holds it. Second, you will not interfere in my life. My work, my time, my affairs, they are my own. You will make no demands on me. You will not expect affection, nor will you feign it." He paused, letting the cruel words hang in the air between them. "This," he said, gesturing around the opulent room, "is your domain. My study, my wing of the house, my life. That is mine. You are and will remain my Duchess only in name. Do you understand me, Lady Ilara?" It was the first time he had used her given name, and he wielded it like an insult. Ilara stood, her hands placed so tightly her knuckles were white. She could cry, she could rage, she could beg. She would do none of them. She met his gaze, her own clear and steady, a flicker of Amesbury pride sparking in their depths. "You have made yourself perfectly clear, Your Grace," she said, her voice quiet but unbroken. "I am not a fool. I understand the nature of a bargain. You will have your propriety. And I will have my peace. You need not fear interference from me." A brief, almost imperceptible flicker of surprise crossed his face. Perhaps he had expected tears. He gave a sharp, cold nod. "Good." He turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. "One more thing. We will be required to appear together in London for the season. We will present a united front. Until then, I suggest you find a hobby. The library is extensive." And with that, he was gone. The door clicked shut, and Ilara was alone once more. She walked to the large, cold bed, the bed she would sleep in alone for the foreseeable future, and finally let out the breath she felt she had been holding since she'd first seen his name on the marriage contract. She did not cry. Instead, a cold, hard resolve settled over her. He wanted a duchess in name only. Very well. He would have one. But she would not be his prisoner. She would find a life within the walls of this gilded cage. The first month at Rothaven Hall was a lesson in cold isolation. Alistair Blackwood was true to his word. He was a ghost, a presence felt only by his absence. Ilara would hear his horse returning from a ride at dawn, or see the light of his study burning well past midnight, but the man himself remained invisible. They inhabited the same house, like 2 warring nations observing a fragile, bitter truce. Ilara, however, was not one to languish. She had been raised on the barren, wind-swept coast of Amesbury, where resilience was as necessary as air. If her husband had ordered her to find a hobby, she would. She began with the house. Mrs. Greystone, who had at first treated Ilara with the same frosty dismissal as the Duke, slowly began to thaw. She was a woman of fierce loyalty, not to the new Duchess, but to Rothaven Hall itself. When Ilara, instead of making demands, began to ask questions about the estate's history, the housekeeper's granite demeanour softened. The third Duke brought this tapestry back from Flanders, Mrs. Greystone explained one afternoon, her hand gesturing to a massive, faded work in the long gallery. He was a fool for a pretty face and a finer thread. Ilara learned that the staff, while respectful of the Duke, also feared him. He demanded perfection, but offered no praise. He was a man who lived entirely in his own head, consumed by ledgers and letters that arrived at all hours by special courier. Ilara's presence began to subtly change the atmosphere of the house. She learned the names of the kitchen maids. She spent time with the head groom, Mr. Hedges, not to demand a horse, but to admire the animals. She found a kinship with these people who, like her, lived in the shadow of the Duke's cold ambition. Her true sanctuary, however, became the library. It was magnificent. 2 stories of dark walnuts, filled with thousands of books. It was here she found her purpose. Tucked away in a dusty corner, she found a collection of botanical texts and a portfolio of exquisite, detailed sketches of flora. They were signed A. Blackwood, not Alistair, but his grandmother, a woman who had apparently shared Ilara's own quiet passion. Inspired, Ilara requisitioned a small, glassed-in conservatory that had fallen into disuse. She spent her days there, sketching, studying, and cultivating the rare, forgotten plants she found on the estate. It was her work, her own small world. One evening, 3 months into her marriage, Alistair announced they would be attending a ball. The local gentry, the Duke of Devonshire, no less, was hosting. It was an obligation, his tone implied, not a pleasure. Ilara, dressed in a gown of pale green silk, a colour she'd chosen to complement her auburn hair, not to please him, met him at the foot of the stairs. He looked magnificent in his evening attire. For a fleeting, foolish moment, her heart stuttered. He simply nodded, his eyes sweeping over her in a cool, assessing glance. "You will suffice." The carriage ride was silent. The ballroom at Chatsworth was a blinding world of light, music, and perfume. Ilara, who had spent months in near total seclusion, felt like a barn owl thrust into the sun. But she held her head high. She was the Duchess of Rothaven. She would play the part. Alistair was immediately swallowed by a crowd of politicians, his expression animated in a way she had never seen. He was arguing, gesturing, his face alive with a passion he never showed her. Ilara was left to drift. It was during this drift that she met him. "Duchess, you seem adrift." The man who spoke was tall, with blonde hair, a charming smile, and eyes that were just a little too clever. He bowed low. "Lord Julian Thorne," he introduced himself. "We have not had the pleasure." "Lord Thorne." Ilara curtsied. She recognized the name. He was a neighbouring landowner, though his reputation in the county was less than stellar. Rumours of gambling debts and loose morals followed him like cheap cologne. "The Duke seems preoccupied," Thorne said, gesturing with his champagne flute toward Alistair. "He leaves the most beautiful flower in the room unattended, a tragic oversight." Ilara stiffened at the easy flattery. "My husband is a busy man, Lord Thorne. His work for the Crown is very important." "Ah, yes, the Crown." Thorne's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "He is quite the patriot, our Duke. Or so he would have us believe. Tell me, Duchess, what is it like to be married to a man made of marble?" I believe, my lord, that is a question you should pose to a sculptor, not to me, Alara replied coolly. Thorne laughed, a sharp, unpleasant sound. A sharp wit, I see. The Duke does not appreciate wit, I fear. He appreciates only advantage. He was standing too close. His gaze lingered on her in a way that made her skin crawl. If you will excuse me, Lord Thorne. She turned to leave, but he placed a hand on her arm. It was a light touch, but possessive. Do not be so hasty, Duchess. We are neighbours. We should be friends. Perhaps you are lonelier at Rothaven than you let on. Perhaps you, like me, find the Duke's particular brand of self-importance suffocating. Take your hand off my wife. Alistair's voice was not loud, but it cut through the music and chatter like a shard of ice. He had appeared from nowhere, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury. His storm-grey eyes were not on Alara, but locked on Thorne. Lord Thorne, to his credit, did not flinch. He slowly removed his hand, his charming smile returning. Alistair, we were just becoming acquainted. Your Duchess is a delight. What she is, Alistair said, his voice dangerously low, is my Duchess, and you will not address her again. You will not look at her. You will not, in fact, remain in the same room as her. The tension between the two men was palpable, a dark, thrumming energy that drew curious stares. Thorne raised his hands in mock surrender. As you wish, Rothaven. Your famous temper. Always a pleasure. Duchess, he bowed to Alara. Until we meet again. He sauntered off, melting back into the crowd. Alistair gripped Alara's elbow, his fingers digging into her skin. We are leaving. He all but dragged her from the ballroom, ignoring the shocked and curious looks. He threw her into the carriage, the door slamming shut with a crack. The ride home was a suffocating, terrible silence. Alara's arm throbbed where he had grabbed her. When they arrived at Rothaven Hall, he escorted her into the grand hall, the staff scattering before his black mood. He turned on her, his face pale with rage. "What in God's name did you think you were doing?" he hissed. Alara, shocked by the venom in his voice, recoiled. "I was doing nothing. I was standing alone, and he approached me. You invited it. You invited that viper's attention. Do you have any idea who he is? What he is? A neighbour. A rude, presumptuous neighbour, but he is a traitor and a degenerate!" Alistair roared, his control finally snapping. The sound echoed in the vast space. "He is a man who would sell his own mother for a new pair of boots. You will never speak to him again. You will not acknowledge him. If you see him, you will walk in the other direction. Is that clear?" Alara stared at him, her own anger rising. It wasn't just his words. It was the injustice. He had ignored her for months, and now he was blaming her for the advances of another man. "You speak of propriety, Your Grace," she said, her voice shaking but gaining strength. "Yet you just manhandled me in front of the entire county. You humiliated me. You humiliated yourself. You warn me away from that man as if I am a child, but you will not tell me why. Is it my safety you are concerned with, or the reputation of your precious name?" He advanced on her, his height and fury meant to intimidate. "Do not test me, Alara. You do not want to know the depths of my work. You do not want to know the dangers. Then do not treat me like an idiot. You left me alone. What did you expect? Did you think I would simply stand by the wall like a potted plant all evening?" "Yes," he shouted. "That is precisely what I expected. I expected you to be what I married you for. An ornament. A silent, beautiful, obedient ornament. Not a liability." The word liability struck her like a physical blow. All the air left her lungs. She looked at this man, this stranger she was tied to, and felt a profound, aching despair. "I see," she whispered. She pulled herself up to her full height, the anger draining away, leaving only the familiar, icy resolve. "Then you have nothing to fear, Your Grace. Your ornament will be returned to its box. I will not trouble you again." She turned and walked up the staircase, not looking back, her spine as straight and rigid as the marble columns that lined the hall. Alistair watched her go, his chest heaving, his fists clenched at his sides. He was left alone in the hall, breathing in the scent of her perfume, jasmine and something wild, and grappling with a new, unwelcome emotion. It was not anger, it was not regret. It was, to his utter astonishment, fear. In the weeks following the Chatsworth ball, the chill between Elara and Alistair deepened into a frigid winter. He became even more remote, his study door a permanent barrier. The only sign of his existence was the constant, unnerving presence of his valet, a man named Thomas. Thomas was not a typical valet. He was a broad-shouldered man with the quiet, watchful eyes of a hawk and a visible scar that snaked from his temple to his jaw. He'd been with Alistair for years, supposedly a batman from the Duke's brief, undistinguished military service. Elara began to notice that Thomas functioned less as a servant and more as a shadow. He checked the locks on the doors at night. He personally inspected every package that arrived, and he never, ever let the Duke ride out alone. Elara, retreating to her conservatory and her books, tried to put the Duke and his dark moods out of her mind. But she was an observant woman. Rothaven Hall was not a political retreat. It was a fortress, and she was beginning to feel like a prisoner within it. Her friendship with the staff, born of her loneliness, now became a source of quiet information. Alice, her maid, would chatter while brushing Elara's hair. "Another one of those strange men arrived last night, Your Grace," Alice whispered one evening. "Not a gentleman, not really. He went straight to the Duke's study, and Mr. Thomas stood outside the door for 3 hours. Didn't even take a cup of tea. A stable boy mentioned that the Duke had a private stable of horses kept separate from the main stalls. Fast ones, Your Grace, built for distance, not for show." Elara started to piece things together. Alistair wasn't just a powerful landowner. He wasn't just a politician. He was involved in something dangerous, something that required bodyguards, secret meetings, and fast horses. He was, she realized, a spy, or something very close to it. The revelation recontextualized everything: his obsession with propriety, his cold, calculating nature, his violent, almost paranoid reaction to Lord Thorne. It wasn't just a personal dispute, it was political. Thorne was not just a rival, he was an enemy. This knowledge filled Elara not with fear, but with a strange, cold clarity. She was in a game she didn't understand, married to a man who was playing for the highest stakes. She decided to test her theory. One afternoon, she accidentally left a rare botanical book in the main library. She knew Alistair often worked there in the late afternoon, as the light from the west-facing windows was best. She waited until she heard him enter, then made her way downstairs on the pretense of retrieving it. She entered the library. He was at the large central table, not with ledgers but with maps. They were coastal maps, marked with red ink. He was so absorbed he didn't hear her enter. She saw Thomas, standing by the door, his hand resting casually on his hip. Elara knew, with a sudden certainty, that there was a pistol tucked into his waistcoat. "Your Grace," Elara said, her voice intentionally soft. Alistair moved faster than she thought possible. In one fluid motion, he swept the maps from the table, concealing them in a large leather portfolio. He stood, his face a thundercloud. I told you I was not to be disturbed, he said, his voice a low growl. I apologize, Elara said, keeping her voice even, refusing to be intimidated. I left my book on Linnaean taxonomy. I did not mean to intrude on matters of state. She let the words, matters of state, hang in the air. His eyes narrowed. He looked at her, really looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time, not as an ornament, but as a variable, an unknown. You are clever, he said. It was not a compliment. Too clever, it seems. You will forget what you saw. I saw nothing, Your Grace, Elara replied, moving to the bookshelf to retrieve her book. Only a man who seems to fear his own wife more than he fears his enemies. She turned to face him, the heavy book clutched to her chest like a shield. You built this wall between us, Alistair. You declared me a Duchess in name only. But a name, I find, carries its own burdens. Your enemies are now my enemies. Your danger is my danger. And you leave me defenseless. You leave me ignorant. Ignorance is your defense, he countered, stepping toward her. The less you know, the safer you are. What I do for England. It is a dangerous, dirty business, and it is no place for a woman. So you would have me be a fool? She shot back, a smiling, vapid fool who knows nothing. Was that the bargain? That was precisely the bargain, he exclaimed. I married you to secure the land, not to gain a confidant. I have Thomas. I have my network. I do not need you. The words were designed to wound, and they did. Elara flinched, the colour draining from her face. She saw Thomas wince from his post at the door. Alistair saw the hit land, and for a split second, a look of something other than anger crossed his face. It might have been regret, but it was gone as quickly as it came. Elara, he said, his voice softer, but no less firm. This is my world. It is a world of shadows. Lord Thorne is not just a fop. He is a traitor. He sells information to the French, to anyone who will pay. He is actively working to destabilize the crown. I have been building the case against him for 2 years. It is my life's work. It is everything. He looked at her, his grey eyes pleading for the one thing he had never asked for, her compliance. He tried to get to me through you at the ball, Alistair continued. He wanted to see if you were a weakness, a way in. I showed him you were not. I showed him you were nothing to me. A Duchess in name, Elara whispered, the full, crushing weight of his strategy landing on her. He hadn't just been cold. He had been protecting her in the most cruel, arrogant and calculating way possible. He had made her an object, a non-entity, to keep her safe. Yes, he said, mistaking her quiet horror for understanding. So you see, you must remain that. Go to your plants, go to your books, but do not ever come near my study or my work again. Your concern is not only unwanted, it is a liability, a danger to us both. Elara looked at him, at this brilliant, cold, lonely man who was willing to sacrifice his own heart and hers for his duty. She felt a sudden, unwelcome rush of pity. And something else, something that felt terrifyingly like respect. But he had asked her to be nothing. He had confirmed her status as an object. As you wish, Your Grace, she said, her voice flat, all the fight gone. I will not trouble you again. She turned and left the library. Alistair watched her go, a deep, unsettling feeling in his gut. He had won the argument. He had secured her silence. So why did he feel like he had just made the single greatest mistake of his life? He turned back to the table, the maps suddenly seeming meaningless, the portfolio in his hand feeling impossibly, tragically empty. Life at Rothaven Hall settled into a new, tense pattern. Ilara, true to her word, became a ghost. She vanished into her conservatory and her gardens. She took her meals in her rooms. She was the perfect, silent, invisible Duchess. Alistair, in turn, threw himself deeper into his work. The net was closing on Julian Thorne. Couriers came and went with increasing frequency. Thomas was a constant, armed shadow at his side. Alistair told himself he was relieved. Ilara was safe. She was out of the way. His world was, at last, compartmentalized as he liked it. But the house felt wrong. The silence, once a comfort, now felt oppressive. The east wing, which he had so deliberately cut off, now felt like a missing limb. He would catch himself listening for her footstep in the hall, or smelling for the scent of jasmine and damp earth that always clung to her. He found one of her gardening gloves, a small, dirt-stained thing, on a hallway table. He'd picked it up, his thumb brushing the soft, worn leather before angrily ordering a maid to return it to the Duchess's wing. He was becoming a stranger to himself. He was irritable, distracted. "You should speak to her, Your Grace," Thomas said one evening, as he helped Alistair with his cravat. Alistair froze, staring at his valet in the mirror. "I have nothing to say to her, and you, Thomas, are overstepping." "With respect, sir, you've done this all wrong," Thomas said, his gruff voice unwavering. He was the only man in the world who could speak to the Duke this way. "You wanted to protect her, so you treated her like a porcelain doll. But she's not. She's strong. Stronger than you, maybe. You didn't put her in a box, sir. You put her in a cage. And now you're wondering why the house feels like a prison. That is enough, Thomas. Lord Thorne doesn't believe your ruse. He's not a fool." Thomas pressed on, ignoring the warning. "He doesn't think she's nothing to you. He thinks she's your one, unguarded treasure. And a man like Thorne, he doesn't respect locks. He just sees a prize." Alistair turned, his face pale. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying she's out there, in those gardens, all day, alone, unprotected, while you're in here, playing with maps." A cold dread, colder than any winter moor, gripped Alistair. He had been so focused on his political war, he had overlooked the most obvious battlefield. He ripped the cravat from his neck. "Find Hedges. Tell him to post 2 men on the garden perimeter. Discreetly. Now. Aye, Your Grace." For the next week, Ilara's garden sanctuary was secretly watched. But Ilara herself had her own routine. Her passion for botany had led her to painting. She had a small, portable easel and a set of watercolors, and she would spend hours capturing the rare orchids in the conservatory or the wild, wind-blown roses that climbed the ancient garden walls. It was a beautiful, crisp autumn afternoon. The air was filled with the scent of wood smoke and damp leaves. Ilara had set up her easel on a small rise overlooking the valley, a spot hidden from the house by a copse of ancient yew trees. Alice had brought her a cup of tea and a blanket, then returned to the house. Ilara was painting, lost in the deep crimson of a late-blooming rose. She was so focused, she did not hear the snap of a twig behind her. She did not hear the soft footfalls. She only registered something was wrong when a shadow fell across her canvas. She looked up, not in fear, but annoyance at the interruption. Her breath caught in her throat. It was not Alistair. It was not Thomas. It was Lord Julian Thorne. He was smiling, that same reptilian smile from the ballroom. He was not dressed for a social call. He was in riding leathers, and he was not alone. 2 brutish-looking men stood behind him. "Duchess," Thorne said, his voice a mocking purr. "Painting the roses. How domestic." I find your husband's taste for isolation inspiring." Ilara's hand instinctively went to her throat. She was a mile from the house. No one could hear her scream. "Lord Thorne," she said, her voice trembling only slightly, "you are trespassing. The Duke will have you arrested." "The Duke," Thorne chuckled, stepping closer, "is a very busy man. He is so busy, in fact, that he has left you here, like a perfect ripe plum, waiting to be plucked. What do you want?" "Oh, so many things. But let's start with you." He reached out and touched a stray lock of her hair. Ilara recoiled, knocking over her paint water. "Do not touch me. Feisty. I like that." Thorne's smile vanished. "My men," he gestured, "are not as gentle as I am. You will come with us. Quietly. We are going to send a message to your in-name-only husband. A message he will understand." "He will not pay a ransom for me," Ilara said, her mind racing. "He told me himself. I am nothing to him." "Ah, you see. That's where you are both wrong," Thorne said, his eyes glittering with a manic light. "He thinks you are nothing. But I know better. I know he has been building a case against me. He thinks he will ruin me. But a man, even a man of marble, will crack when you take what he truly values. Not his money, not his lands, but the one thing he pretends not to want." He grabbed her arm. Ilara screamed, a high, desperate sound that was cut short as one of the men clamped a rough hand over her mouth. She kicked and fought, but she was no match for them. "Bring the easel," Thorne commanded. "I want him to know exactly what was taken." They dragged her, struggling, into the trees where horses were waiting. An hour later, Alice returned to collect the tea tray. She found the overturned stool, the spilled paint water, a dark stain on the grass, the shawl snagged on a briar bush, and the easel. It stood alone, the canvas a half-finished painting of a single perfect red rose. It was beautiful, and it was terrifyingly, dreadfully empty. Alice's scream, unlike Ilara's, carried all the way to the house. The scream tore through the oppressive silence of Rothaven Hall. Alistair was in his study, the maps spread out before him. He had been staring at the same point on the coastline, a small hidden cove near Thorne's property, for an hour, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. When Alice's shriek echoed through the open window, he was on his feet before the sound had even died. He met the hysterical maid on the grand staircase. "What is it? What has happened?" "The Duchess, Your Grace. She's gone. The garden. The easel. It's all gone." The blood drained from Alistair's face. He pushed past her, taking the stairs 3 at a time, vaulting over the stone balustrade and sprinting across the lawn toward the yew trees. Thomas, appearing from the stables with a look of grim premonition, was right behind him. He burst through the trees into the clearing. The scene was exactly as Alice had described, but worse. It was a tableau of violence, the overturned stool, the spilled paint, the abandoned shawl. "He was here," Thomas said, his voice flat. He pointed to the ground. "Hoofprints, 3 horses, shod by a Cheapside smith, Thorne's man." But Alistair was not looking at the ground. He was staring at the easel. His world, so carefully constructed, so rigidly controlled, did not just crack. It shattered. It imploded, leaving him in a vacuum, unable to breathe. "She's gone," he whispered. The words were alien. They made no sense. He took her. "Alistair." Thomas put a hand on his shoulder. "We need to move. Now. We know where he is. That cove. He'll be planning to take her to France." Alistair didn't hear him. He walked toward the easel, as if in a trance. He reached out and touched the canvas. The red paint of the rose was still damp. He had been too late. By an hour, by minutes. His in-name only lie, the armor he had built around himself, evaporated. What was left was a raw, gaping terror that was so profound, so agonizing, that he doubled over, bracing himself against the easel. It was not the Duke of Rothaven who stood in that clearing. It was a man who had just realized he had systematically, cruelly, and arrogantly pushed away the only thing in his life that mattered. He had called her a liability, an ornament. He remembered her face in the library, the hurt in her eyes when he'd said, "I do not need you." "Liar," he whispered to himself. "I am a fool, a god-damned fool." "Your Grace!" Thomas's voice was sharp, a slap in the face. "Alistair, get a grip. We can still get her back, but we must go now." The Duke's head snapped up. The grief, the terror, the self-loathing, it all coalesced, hardening in an instant into something else. It hardened into a fury so pure and so cold it was incandescent. It was the in-name only Duke, but with a new, terrifying purpose. "He's a dead man, Thomas," Alistair said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp he didn't recognize. "Not if we get her back first," Thomas countered, pulling him away from the easel. "No, he is a dead man." Alistair's eyes were the color of the storm he'd always kept inside. He touched what was mine. He tore a piece of the canvas from the easel, the corner with the half-painted rose, and shoved it into his pocket. A reminder. A promise. "The horses, Thomas, the fast ones, and the rifles. They're already waiting," Thomas said. Alistair strode back to the house, his movements precise, deadly. The staff, gathered in a terrified huddle in the main hall, shrank back. This was not the cold, remote Duke they knew. This was a predator. He went to his study, but not for the maps. He unlocked a heavy wooden box on his desk. Inside were 2 matched, heavy-caliber percussion pistols. He checked the priming, his hands perfectly steady. Mrs. Greystone stood in the doorway, her face pale. "Your Grace." "What?" "Thorne has her," Alistair said, not looking up. "He took her." "Oh my God," the housekeeper breathed. "That poor child. And you drove her." Alistair looked up, his face a mask of stone. "Yes, Mrs. Greystone, I did. I drove her right into his hands. And if I do not get her back, you may inform the Prince Regent that his little spy has failed, and that this house will have no master or mistress." He brushed past her. "Tell no one. Send to Bow Street. Tell them to block the roads out of London. Tell them to drag the Thames. But not until dawn. I want 3 hours." He met Thomas at the stable. They mounted. "We ride for the coast, Thomas. We ride to ruin." "And if he's not there, Alistair?" Alistair Blackwood, the Duke of Rothaven, turned his horse toward the moors, the setting sun glinting off the pistols in his belt. "Then we will follow him into the fires of hell itself." As they galloped out of the gates, Alistair pulled the scrap of canvas from his pocket. He looked at the half-finished rose, the last, innocent thing her hands had touched. The world he had known, of politics, of duty, of cold, empty rooms, was gone. It had collapsed, leaving only this one, singular, agonizing truth. She was not his Duchess in name. She was his life, and he had just let her be taken. The ride to the coast was a blur of thundering hooves, stinging wind, and Alistair's own tormented thoughts. Every beat of the gallop hammered a new regret into his soul. "You are only my Duchess in name." The words, once a shield, were now a curse. He saw her face at the ball, defiant and beautiful. He saw her in the library, proud and wounded. He saw the empty easel. They rode for hours, pushing their horses to the brink, the moon a sickly sliver in the sky. They cut across moors, bypassed towns, and finally, just before dawn, They smelled the salt of the sea. The cove was just as it appeared on the map, a jagged inlet hidden by high cliffs, accessible only by a treacherous winding path. At the base of the cliffs, nestled against the rocks, was a derelict stone structure, once a smuggler's den, now a rotted-out tavern. A single, flickering lantern hung over the door. "He's here," Thomas breathed, pulling his horse to a halt. "A ship, in the bay, getting ready to catch the tide." Alistair dismounted, his legs aching, his heart a cold stone. He pulled his pistol. "You take the back. I take the front. No one comes out, except Ilara." "Alistair," Thomas grabbed his arm. "We need her alive. That means he needs to be alive, at least until we have her. No matter what he says, no matter what he's done, you get her first. Do you understand me?" Alistair looked at his friend, his eyes burning in the dim light. He gave a single, sharp nod. "Get her first." They moved down the path like shadows. The sound of the surf crashing against the rocks covered their approach. Alistair reached the door. He could hear voices inside, Thorne's, oily and triumphant, and the rough grumble of his men. He did not hear Ilara. Rage, hot and black, threatened to overwhelm him. He took a breath, held the scrap of canvas in his pocket, and kicked the door open. He was a whirlwind of black-coated fury. The door slammed against the wall, and Alistair was inside before the three men at the table could even stand. "Where is she, Thorne?" Alistair's voice was a low snarl. Lord Thorne, who had been pouring a glass of brandy, dropped it. The glass shattered, but the sound was drowned out by the roar of Thomas's rifle as he appeared at the back window, shooting the pistol out of one of the henchmen's hands. "Rothaven!" Thorne shrieked, scrambling backward. "You're too late. She's already on the ship." "You're a liar," Alistair said, advancing, his pistol steady. "Am I?" Thorne smiled, regaining his composure. "You think I'd keep her here? She's delicate. I sent her ahead, a gift for my new friends in Calais." Alistair's finger tightened on the trigger. "Alistair! The cellar!" Thomas shouted, dispatching the second henchman with the butt of his rifle. Alistair's gaze flickered to a heavy wooden trap-door in the corner of the room. Thorne saw the look and lunged for the door, but Alistair was faster. He crossed the room in 2 bounds, grabbing Thorne by his collar and slamming him against the wall, the pistol pressed hard under his chin. "Open it," Alistair commanded. "Go to hell, Blackwood." Alistair pressed the barrel harder, forcing Thorne's head back. "I am already there. Open the door. It's locked, and I have the only key." Thorne spat, a small, triumphant gleam in his eye. Alistair didn't hesitate. He shot the lock. The sound was deafening in the small room. Wood splintered, and the trap-door flew open. "Ilara!" he roared. A faint sound came from the darkness below, a cry, her voice. It was the only sound that mattered. In that instant, Alistair forgot Thorne. He forgot the mission. He forgot everything but her. He dropped his pistol and lunged for the cellar opening. It was the mistake Thorne had been waiting for. As Alistair's back was turned, Thorne, free and desperate, grabbed the one remaining pistol from the table, the one dropped by the henchman. "Alistair, no!" Thomas yelled, but he was too far away. Alistair was halfway down the steps when he heard the click of the hammer. He turned, his heart stopping. Thorne was pointing the pistol straight at him, his hand shaking, his face a mask of sweat and hatred. "You took everything from me, Rothaven. My name, my lands. Now you can die, knowing she is mine." He fired. Ilara, who had just appeared at the bottom of the steps, her hands bound, her dress torn, screamed. Alistair felt the impact like a white-hot poker slamming into his shoulder. The force spun him around, and he fell backward down the steps, landing in a heap at Ilara's feet. "Alistair!" she shrieked, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror. Above them, Thorne laughed, a high, manic sound. "He's dead! The Duke is dead!" Thomas, having reloaded, took careful aim, but before he could fire, Elara moved. She had been working on her ropes the entire time, fraying them on a sharp stone in the cellar wall. With Thorne distracted, she snapped the last fibre. Her hands were free. She didn't run. She didn't scream. She grabbed a heavy, rotted piece of driftwood from the floor of the cellar and scrambled back up the steps, emerging just as Thorne was turning to flee. She swung the piece of wood with all the strength of her fear and her rage, connecting with the back of Thorne's knees. He howled as his legs buckled, and he tumbled back into the room. Thomas was on him in an instant, his rifle at Thorne's throat. But Elara was already back in the cellar, dropping to her knees beside Alistair. "Alistair! Oh God, Alistair, look at me!" He was conscious. Barely. His face was grey, and blood was gushing from his shoulder. "Elara," he gasped, his hand reaching for her. "I'm here. I'm here." She tore a strip from her petticoat, her hands shaking, and pressed it hard against the wound. You fool. You absolute, arrogant fool." "You came," he whispered, his eyes fluttering. "Of course I came," she said, tears streaming down her face, mixing with the blood on her hands. Did you really think I was on the ship?" Alistair coughed, blood flecking his lips. He said, "You were nothing to me." "And you believed him?" she sobbed, applying more pressure. "No," Alistair whispered, his gaze locking with hers. The cold grey was gone, replaced by a desperate, burning clarity. "You are everything. My in-name only lie. Fool. Hush. Save your strength." "I thought I'd lost you," he breathed. Elara leaned down, her lips brushing his ear, her voice fierce. "You never had me, Alistair Blackwood." "Not yet. So you are not allowed to die. Do you hear me? You are not allowed." Thomas appeared at the top of the stairs. "He's secure." "How is he?" "He's bleeding to death," Elara cried. "Help me. We have to get him out of here." Together they hauled the Duke, now semi-conscious, up the steps. They laid him on the tavern floor. Alistair's eyes found Elara's again. "The rose," he mumbled. "In my pocket." Elara, confused, reached into his coat pocket. She pulled out the blood-soaked scrap of canvas, the half-finished crimson rose. She stared at it, and she finally understood. He had not come for his property. He had not come for his name. He had come for her. "Hold on, Alistair," she whispered, clutching the canvas. "Just hold on. I will not be a widow. Not after I have only just found my husband." The journey back to Rothaven Hall was a nightmare, with Elara refusing to leave Alistair's side, her hands pressed against his wound. While Lord Thorne was handed over to the king's men, his fate sealed by treason, Elara's entire world was the man fading in and out of consciousness. For 2 weeks, Alistair hovered between life and death. The bullet had been deep, the wound had festered, and a fever took hold. Elara, the in-name-only Duchess, never left him. She took over the study she had been forbidden, sleeping in a chair by his bed. She changed his bandages, bathed his brow, and read to him from her botany books, her calm, steady voice a lifeline in his fevered dreams. Mrs. Greystone, watching this transformation, saw the iron will of a true Duchess. "He didn't break her," the housekeeper was heard to remark. "He forged her." On the 15th day, the fever broke. Alistair woke to the smell of jasmine. He opened his eyes. Elara was asleep in the chair, her head resting on her arms, her auburn hair loose. She looked exhausted, pale, and more beautiful than he had ever seen her. "Elara," he whispered. His voice was a dry rasp. Her head shot up, her eyes wide and startled, met his. "Alistair!" She was at his side in an instant, her hand on his cheek. "You're back. Your eyes are clear." "You stayed," he murmured. "You are my husband, Alistair," she replied, her voice breaking. "No," he said, his voice gaining a fraction of its strength. "That was the contract. I was a fool." He reached for her hand. "A fool who thought he could control the world by locking it out. I thought, to be strong, I had to be empty." He looked at their joined hands. "When I saw that easel, Ilara, my world, it did not just collapse, it realigned. I realized in that one awful moment I had built my entire life on the wrong foundation. It was all just dust. Without you." He took a shaky breath. "I was terrified. Not of Thorne, not of dying. I was terrified that I would die, and you would never know." "Know what?" she whispered, her heart pounding. "That you were never in name only." "I love you, Ilara. I have loved you, I think, since you stood up to me in the library. And I have been a fool every single day since." Ilara, who had not cried when she was kidnapped, who had not cried when she faced Thorne, who had not cried while she fought for his life, finally wept. "I called you an ornament," he whispered, his good arm wrapping around her. "You are the sun, and I was a blind man. I do not deserve you. But I am asking. Not as a duke, but as the man who almost lost you." He tilted her chin up, his storm-grey eyes clear and open. "Ilara Blackwood, will you be my wife? My real wife?" She looked at him, at this proud, broken, brilliant man. She smiled, her tears still wet on her cheeks. "I suppose I will have to," she said. "After all, you are a terrible patient, Alistair, and I cannot trust Mrs. Greystone to do it properly." He laughed, a real warm sound that filled the room. He pulled her closer and kissed her. It was not the chaste, cold kiss of a contract. It was the kiss of a man who had been given a second chance, a kiss of desperation and promise, of regret and a new, shared future. It was the first day of their marriage. The story of Alistair and Ilara proves that even the coldest hearts can be set ablaze, and that true love often waits in the silence, hidden behind walls of duty and pride. It took the darkest danger for the Duke to realize that the woman he called his in-name-only Duchess was, in fact, his entire world. Their journey was one of pain, misunderstanding, and ultimately a hard-won redemption. If their story of drama and survival touched your heart, please don't let this video be in-name only in your history. Show your support by giving it a like. It truly helps the channel. If you know someone who loves a story of historical romance and suspense, please share it with them. And most importantly, if you want to hear more tales of dramatic love, treacherous plots, and worlds collapsing, be sure to subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell. We have so many more stories to tell. Thank you for listening.